The courtroom was silent as the judge glared down from his bench, his expression cold and full of arrogance. He had seen plenty of defendants in his time, and to him, this teenage girl standing before him was no different. Dressed in a simple button-up shirt and slacks, she looked nervous but determined. The judge, however, didn't see determination, he saw defiance. And he didn't like it. "You dare lecture me about the law," he scoffed, shaking his head. His voice echoed through the courtroom, dripping with disbelief. Laughter rippled through the room as the spectators whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads at the girl's audacity. She wasn't even a lawyer, just some kid who thought she could outsmart a seasoned judge. At least, that's what they thought. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she held her ground, her eyes steady, her posture unwavering. There was something in her expression, something sharp, something knowing. She wasn't rattled, not even a little. The judge leaned forward, expecting her to stumble over her words, to back down like so many others before her. But what he didn't know, what nobody in that courtroom knew, was that this so-called teenager was no ordinary defendant. She was, in fact, a brilliant attorney in disguise. A legal prodigy who had mastered the law at an age when most kids were still figuring out their math homework. And she was about to turn the entire courtroom upside down. As the judge smirked, ready to dismiss her argument before she could even finish, she took a deep breath and spoke. But this time, her voice carried something different. Power, authority, knowledge. The very things this judge thought only he possessed. And within seconds, the entire courtroom began to shift. The laughter stopped. The whispers died down. Even the judge, once so smug and dismissive, started to realize that he might have just made the biggest mistake of his career. Because in just a few moments, she was about to prove that she didn't just know the law, she owned it. The judge narrowed his eyes, tapping his gavel against the bench, trying to regain control of the room. He had expected this girl to fumble, to struggle with her words, but instead, she spoke with a kind of confidence that only came from someone who knew what they were talking about. His smirk faltered for just a second, but he quickly masked it with a scoff. "All right, if you're so smart, let's hear it," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Go ahead and tell me why I should take anything you say seriously." The girl adjusted her posture, keeping her hands steady at her sides. She didn't look nervous, not even under the judge's scrutinizing glare. In fact, she looked ready. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but firm. "According to Section 15 of the Legal Code, the ruling you made in the previous case directly contradicts the precedent set by the Supreme Court in Mason v. State That decision clearly established that." The judge's face hardened. He cut her off mid-sentence. "That's enough," he snapped, his voice louder than before. His reaction wasn't because she was wrong. No, it was because she was right. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The attorneys sitting at the prosecution table exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from amusement to something closer to concern. They had dismissed this girl the moment she walked in, assuming she was just another reckless teenager who thought she could outtalk the law. But now, they weren't so sure. In the back of the courtroom, a woman in a dark suit watched closely, her sharp eyes locked onto the girl. Unlike the others, she wasn't laughing or whispering. Instead, she looked intrigued, like she knew something the rest of them didn't. The judge's jaw tightened. "And where exactly did you get your law degree, young lady?" he asked mockingly, trying to reassert his authority. The girl didn't miss a beat. She simply tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into the faintest smile. "Oh, don't worry, Your Honor," she said smoothly. "You'll find out soon enough." The courtroom grew tense, a thick silence settling over the space as everyone waited for the judge's reaction. His fingers curled around the edge of his bench, his expression unreadable. He had spent years controlling this room, demanding respect without question. Yet here stood this young girl, unshaken, standing tall like she belonged there. Like she owned the law just as much as he did. The prosecution attorney, a man with graying hair and a confident smirk, leaned back in his chair, chuckling under his breath. "This is a joke, right?" he muttered, shaking his head. "She read a few law books and thinks she's qualified to argue in court." But the woman in the dark suit sitting at the back didn't laugh. Her gaze remained locked on the girl, analyzing every word, every movement. There was something about her, something familiar. The girl took a slow step forward, her eyes never leaving the judge's. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I believe you know that dismissing a legal argument simply because of someone's age isn't exactly a fair practice. Unless, of course, you're admitting that the law only applies when it's convenient for you." A ripple of murmurs filled the room. Even the stenographer, who had spent years documenting endless court cases, seemed to pause for a split second. The judge's nostrils flared. This was his courtroom. He wouldn't be challenged by some teenager playing dress-up. "Watch yourself," he warned, his voice lowering. But there was something else in his tone now, a flicker of uncertainty. The girl simply nodded. "Of course, Your Honor. That's exactly what I've been doing. Watching, listening, learning." She turned slightly, glancing at the attorneys seated nearby. "And from what I've gathered, there have been several cases in this very courtroom where decisions were made without the proper legal basis. Cases where people lost not because they were guilty, but because they didn't have the resources or knowledge to fight back." Now, the murmurs grew louder. The woman in the dark suit leaned forward slightly, interest flashing in her eyes. The prosecution attorney shifted uncomfortably. The judge exhaled slowly, tapping his gavel twice. "That's enough." But the girl didn't back down. Not yet. She was only getting started. The judge's grip on his gavel tightened as he stared down at the girl, his frustration barely concealed beneath his calm exterior. He had ruled over this courtroom for years, unchallenged, unquestioned. And yet, here was this teenager, no official title, no law degree, forcing him onto the defensive in front of a full courtroom. "You think you know how this works," he said, his voice low but sharp. "The law isn't about showing up and reciting a few cases you read about online. It takes experience. It takes years of study." His eyes narrowed. "It takes real authority." The girl met his gaze without fear. "Authority comes from understanding the law, Your Honor. Not just enforcing it, but applying it fairly." She glanced toward the prosecution table. "And from what I've seen, that hasn't exactly been happening here." A hushed gasp spread through the room. The prosecution attorney straightened in his chair, shooting a glare at the judge, as if silently asking if he was going to let her get away with that. The judge clenched his jaw, his pride keeping him from showing any sign of doubt. The woman in the back of the courtroom leaned forward now, her hands clasped together. There was something about the girl's confidence, her knowledge. It wasn't random. It wasn't just some teenager with an attitude. The judge let out a slow breath. "If you're as brilliant as you claim to be, then prove it," he challenged. "Show me a case, right now, where my ruling was legally incorrect." He leaned forward, expecting hesitation, expecting failure. But the girl didn't flinch. Instead, she calmly reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Gladly," she said. "Let's start with your ruling from 3 months ago. Jenkins v. State *. You sentenced a man based on a technicality that was legally overturned 2 years prior. You ignored the appeal, dismissed the new evidence, and denied him fair representation." The courtroom fell into complete silence. The judge's face paled slightly. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The woman in the back of the courtroom suddenly stood, her eyes locked on the girl. And then finally she spoke. "Who *you?" The girl slowly turned toward the woman who had just spoken. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her face, recognition, but she quickly masked it, keeping her composure. That's a great question, she said, slipping the paper back into her pocket. But I think the real question is, why does it matter asterisk now asterisk? The woman took a step forward, her sharp eyes scanning the girl carefully, piecing something together. Because, she said slowly, if what you're saying is true, then that ruling wasn't just a mistake. It was a deliberate miscarriage of justice. A murmur swept through the courtroom. The judge sat frozen for a moment before clearing his throat and slamming his gavel down. That's asterisk enough asterisk, he barked. This is a courtroom, not a conspiracy forum. But there was something different in his voice now, an edge of unease. His usual confidence had been chipped away, bit by bit, and now cracks were starting to show. The girl folded her arms, tilting her head slightly. Is that why you ignored the appeal, Your Honor? Because you knew that case wouldn't hold up under real scrutiny. The tension in the room thickened. The prosecution attorney shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding eye contact with the judge. The woman in the dark suit narrowed her eyes. I need to know your name, she pressed, her voice quieter but firm. The girl hesitated just for a second before exhaling. You already know it, she said. The woman's eyes widened slightly, and then, like a puzzle clicking into place, realization dawned. She turned sharply toward the judge, her expression unreadable. You knew, didn't you? She asked, her voice calm but full of accusation. You knew exactly who she was. The judge stiffened. That's ridiculous, he snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Everyone was watching, waiting, trying to piece together what was unfolding in front of them. The girl took a slow step forward. Go ahead, Your Honor. Tell them. The judge's face paled even more, and for the first time since this trial began, he had nothing to say. The entire courtroom was silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone inside. The judge's face remained tense, his grip on the gavel unsteady. He opened his mouth as if to defend himself, but no words came. The girl simply stood there waiting. She wasn't scared. She wasn't uncertain. She already knew the truth. She just needed him to admit it. The woman in the dark suit took another step forward. Your Honor, she said, her voice measured but firm, I suggest you tell the court exactly why you dismissed that appeal, because if you don't, I will. The judge let out a slow breath, his gaze flicking between the girl and the woman. He was out of options. He could feel the walls closing in, and for the first time in his career, he had no control over what was happening in his courtroom. Finally, he leaned forward, gripping the bench. Fine, he muttered. You want the truth. Here it is. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. That appeal was never meant to reach my desk, but when it did, I recognized the name immediately, and I knew exactly who was behind it. The girl didn't flinch. She already knew where this was going. The judge exhaled sharply. Her father, he admitted. One of the best defense attorneys this city has ever seen. A man who spent his entire career making sure people like me never got the last word. A shocked murmur swept through the room. The woman in the dark suit nodded slowly, as if this was exactly what she had expected. The girl took a step closer, her voice unwavering. And when my father uncovered corruption in this courtroom, you made sure he never practiced law again. You silenced him. But what you didn't realize, Your Honor, is that I was watching asterisk. She held up the paper again, and I got everything I need to prove it. The judge's face turned ashen. He looked around, as if searching for an escape, but there was none. The courtroom was no longer his to control. Then the doors swung open. 2 officers entered, walking straight toward the bench. The woman in the dark suit turned to them and nodded. The judge's hands curled into fists. You don't understand, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The girl met his gaze one last time. No, Your Honor, she said. I understand perfectly. And with that, the gavel slipped from his hand, clattering onto the bench as the officers stepped forward. The judge sat frozen, his once commanding presence now reduced to silence. The officers moved toward him, but he didn't resist. There was no point. He knew this moment had been coming for a long time. He just never expected it to arrive like this. The girl watched as the weight of his decisions finally caught up with him. She had spent years preparing for this, uncovering every detail, every case he had manipulated, every life he had ruined. And now justice was no longer in his hands. It was in hers. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, attorneys glancing at each other, trying to process what had just unfolded. The prosecution attorney looked visibly shaken, realizing that the case he had been so confident about had just crumbled before his eyes. The woman in the dark suit turned to the girl, studying her one last time before offering a small, knowing nod. "You did what no one else could," she said quietly. "Your father would be proud." For the first time, the girl's expression softened. She had carried this fight alone for so long, fueled by the injustice done to her family. And now, standing here, she realized that it was over. The battle had been won. As the officers led the judge out of the courtroom, he turned back one last time. There was no anger left in his eyes, only regret. But the girl didn't need his words. The truth had already spoken for itself. With the case dismissed and the courtroom slowly emptying, she let out a quiet breath. Justice wasn't always about winning. It was about making things right. And today, she had done just that. As she walked toward the exit, the woman in the dark suit fell into step beside her. "So, what's next?" she asked. The girl smiled slightly. "I think I just proved I belong here." The woman smirked. "I think you did too." And with that, they pushed open the doors and stepped into the world beyond the courtroom, one where justice wasn't just an idea, but something that could be fought for and won.